Philadelphia Fusion is a team for which no concept across the season seemed holy. They seem to be a team that reasons from first principles, meaning that they don't just take these truisms that we've so far learned about Overwatch, but they question them, and if need be, they revise them and introduce them in a different way, in their way. So, what if Shadowburn is one of the best Genjis in the world? He will get his chance, but what if EQ is better? What if he's more communicative? What if he's actually quite comparable in terms of how he plays while even giving directions and talking? So what if Fraggy dies a lot? We can work around that. We have 2-star player DPS that now have a lot of room, and we can res Fraggy in a Mercy meta. So what if we're 1 man down? If the opponent expects us to pull out and re-engage and have the momentum and have the positioning, we can turn it around. And these sort of unorthodox answers to certain questions that nobody seemed to be asking were a hallmark across the season for Philadelphia Fusion. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, which made them such an incredibly streaky team, and they seem to be on their game now, and it possibly leads to one of the greatest finals we've ever seen in Overwatch. Now, Philadelphia Fusion is a team that works off their individual skill. If you're a viewer of Refute This, you will see that Sideshow argued that Philadelphia Fusion is the team with the most potential, meaning the highest pound-for-pound value in the league in terms of the player quality they have on their team. They have an incredible ability to clutch it out when it gets chaotic, and it's these weird 4v4 situations where their players seem to be able to make up plays on the spot. They just have such an intuitive feel for what it looks like, but they also have set plays, and very unorthodox ones is that. It seems to be that offbeat play is also one of their specialities. They've definitely thrown some curveballs across the season at teams, one at which came to mind against London Spitfire in the stage playoff finals, where repeatedly, especially Profit and Gesture, was simply not in tune with the type of beat that Philadelphia Fusion was playing at the time. Weird re-engages, weird angles, and it was completely unpredictable for them. Another factor that really seemed to outline what Philadelphia Fusion was across the season is a bunch of very gutsy decisions that now we know paid off now that they've made it to the season finals. So let's actually start from the makeup of their team. Let's look at what this team is constituted of. I will not mention everyone in the team, but mainly those that were actually staples on the team and then also turned out to have a pretty big impact on all of this. Now, with all of scouting, if you want, you start with the makers, which is the coaching staff. So the coaching staff is made of Hayes, Kirby, Named Hui, and Beezy, as far as I'm aware. I'm sure there's someone else, but these 4 had some tenure in Overwatch beforehand. So let's go down the list. Hayes was formerly the coach. I believe his title was coach of E-United, where he stayed with them quite a while. E-United was a team that was known for their very, very refined play, where I think a lot of people would agree with me. They were very good at maximizing the player potential they had, and were always competitive, or at least for the most of the time that Hayes was part of it, with the European top teams. Always maybe missing it a little bit, and obviously Rogue was head and shoulders above everyone else at the time, but when they were alone in Europe, really only Movistar Riders, and then also later on a couple of other teams such as 1-2-3 could rival them. But in general, it was, I believe, a very crisp team in how they executed, and I also believe they had pretty good comps in that team. The next one is the head coach, Kirby. He was previously of Hammers, and as far as I remember, he started out in Overwatch as a content creator, did some of these types of videos that, like you're watching now, elaborating on concepts, but then rather quickly moved into coaching, and, well, the rest is history. If we're thinking about the big head coaches that we're talking about this season, like a Krusty, like a Moon, and whatever, I wonder if Kirby's performance over the season was a little bit underrated, but keep in mind, with a team that has such ups and downs as the Philadelphia Fusion had, that is definitely a possibility. I know that he was also the one that was, I believe, one of the founding or the first members in the Philadelphia Fusion. He is, in effect, doing a lot of what a GM does in other teams, namely also recruiting other coaches or having a say in all the player signings and whatever. And I think a lot of credit goes to him to also assembling such a great coaching staff that it turned out to be. Then there is Name Tree, I hope I pronounced it correctly, previously of FaZe Clan, and well, that team always had moderate success, even though they had some breakout performances at, was it the Atlantic Showdown? I'm wondering, or am I mistaking it for the Overwatch Open? But there were tournaments where they got into the finals. What is interesting about Name Tree is that, of course, the Philadelphia Fusion slot, basically, you would have thought pre-season that they were made out of at least a couple of the core members of the old FaZe Clan, mainly Shadowburn, Carpe, and of course Joemeister. Well, that didn't hold up very long, but what came out of that, or the core of FaZe, never seemed to really be too tangential in what Philadelphia Fusion was about, I believe. Because FaZe Clan famously was more pretty much the opposite of the United, I would argue, where they had a lot of potential, but could only actualize it for a couple of their events. The last that I know of, and if I'm missing someone, I'm very sorry, I haven't encountered you so far, I had a conversation with you, is BZ. And BZ is also a very interesting character. So, BZ is the data analyst. I'm not sure if that's his official title, but he does some very cool outside-the-box thinking and analysis also for community stuff, such as top 500 hero distributions of one tricks, and you know that like he did some analysis on how often you had, for instance, trap games or back-to-back games, and who was basically favored by the schedule. Of him, I would actually like to see more content made of, because as a data wizard, I think a lot of teams have one now, but only, of course, Wizard Young was praised across the season. He also, of course, had a very unorthodox approach. I'm very curious what BZ was able to come up with for the team, and obviously that is something maybe we'll find out after the season. That would certainly be a baller interview if we could see what kind of analysis tools he created and if he's willing to share that with us. Now, talking about the team, I think as a general topic, it's actually pretty crazy how many chances they took. And I'm saying chances really just meaning that it looked like chances from the outside, but it seems to me that this coaching team had a very good nose for high-performance players, also very streaky players. If you're interested why that is generally preferable to a consistently good player, I have also content on this channel. I think it's called Tides and Waves. But yeah, this basically is the foundation of what the Philly Fusion was. A team that even though it looked to be based on scratch, on phase from the core, really was a team that was made from scratch. And I think if we now look at the final makeup of the team and the team that we regularly mostly saw over the season, I think we will find that they basically reinvented a lot of the players, they reinvented play styles, and they reinvented the win conditions that they had. So let's start maybe with Hotbar. So previously Hotbar was on LW Red. I can't say he was turning a lot of heads during his time. LW Red famously during his time now has had a couple of pretty baller players such as Nene, who has yet to make it to Overwatch League. I hope that will be rectified in Season 2. I'm not sure about his age. But yeah, Hotbar wasn't actually that big of a deal initially. And especially, and then I guess it may also make sense to talk about the second D.Va player, with Poco coming in, who was considered a very good D.Va player in Europe, but was sort of underappreciated. And if you talk to a couple of players, they would tell you that he was very good, but we couldn't have known just how good he was, because he had a time where he was legitimately one of the best D.Va players. Then, even as that concept of Poco being a good player was now finally entering our minds, the Philadelphia Fusion once again, when Sado's ban was lifted, and I guess that's the next player we can talk about, shifted over back to Hotbar, which in a sort of way, if you think about it, you have two guys that for the most of the season were on the bench and could develop that synergy, come from the same country, would then be fielded. I think that was definitely once again a predictive move, but once again a ballsy one, because Fraggy and Poco were working very well. And especially if we're thinking about Fraggy, the next player I want to talk about, we're thinking of a guy that had a very aggressive Reinhardt, was mainly known for that one, and you would have thought that once the Reinhardt meta was coming around, well, Fraggy, good Reinhardt, truism, but in Philadelphia Fusion that absolutely doesn't fly. The underlying question is, who's the better Reinhardt? And it also really needs to be said that Sado is a huge success for what Philadelphia Fusion is trying to do. He's very versatile, is certainly one of the better main tanks in the Overwatch League, and in the end, definitely, I think, was worth waiting for all that time and has slotted in pretty well. Now, Hotbar also seems to be coming around. I was honestly not a big fan of his in Stage 4, and the ways they now substitute Poco in there as well for certain maps is definitely pretty interesting. They seem to have increased the combinations they can run between those, and now Sado and my bad, Sado and Poco seem to be working as well, but Hotbar definitely leveled up his performance as well and is now a fully fledged member and has arrived in that squad. Now, once again about Fraggy is that what was very interesting about the entire Fraggy concept was that we knew he was a very aggressive main tank player, and with the introduction of his, I heard time and time again in all these pro channels, in all these talks I had with pro players, we know what Fraggy can do. The question is, what can you do with Fraggy? If you have Fraggy, then this dictates a playstyle. Well, in the beginning of their success, I think there was some truth to it, but also, once again, this truism of Fraggy is very aggressive. Philadelphia Fusion, across, especially later Stage 2, Stage 3, turned this on his head, played actually very smart Overwatch. He started playing more together with Carpe on the Tracer, forming that famous Tracer Winston duo, and then also had some coordination. What they also did was, I sadly haven't looked up the exact stats, but from memory I know that by far Fraggy was the most res player for a while. And then when that didn't work as well anymore, especially in the stage 3 meta, they completely switched it to Boombox. Boombox then received most of the resurrections, and they had a couple of troubles during that time, but once again, a championship league winning team doesn't necessarily need to be consistent over the season. And if you want to win pretty much the biggest titles there are, once again, being a streaky team definitely makes it easier. Now, talking about Boombox, he also came over from EU United, probably was vouched for by Hayes, and I think he was one of the more proven players on the Philadelphia Fusion, which is a crazy thing to say, because what we thought Boombox to be was just a very good Zenyatta player who had the potential, was definitely popping off, was known for his aim, but in the grand scheme of things, when we have people like, you know, Ru Jae Hong at the time, or Ananko, or who else would be a name that could be mentioned, like a Cox probably, he didn't seem to be on that level quite yet. And while I question if he is one of the best Zenyatas in the league, he definitely, once again, also has these streaky performances and is a staple in that team. And I believe has played the vast majority of the matches, except, yeah, he might have actually played every single one. I'm not 100% sure how much they play. No, he probably had like 2 or 3 substitutions. The backline in general was a very big surprise to me, and I think also to followers of the European scene. Because the next member I'm going to talk about is possibly one of the most improved players in the Overwatch League for me. And why do I say that? Well, it's not just improved, it's also changed. Once again, we're talking about Neptuno, a guy that was initially a DPS in Mouse Sports, then was part of the Movistar Riders, where he played Lucio, and famously, he was an extremely aggressive Lucio. So, looking at them at TakeOver, there were situations where, I guess commonly one would have had to say that he should have done a better job protecting his Zenyatta in Dante. Not the one from Philadelphia Fusion, but the Dutch guy. And I believe there was also some people saying that Neptuno at the time, because of how he envisioned this meta to be played out, was one of the weaker links on the Movistar Riders. So, once again, we have an aggressive Lucio, almost someone like a Dak in there, who then is asked, and he goes on to Cloud9, refines his skill set, and I had a pretty good relationship with Neptuno, talked to him a bunch, did a couple of one interview with him, and then every now and then talked to him, and I remember him saying, I really need to get this. And this is definitely a guy that does a lot of what he does based on sheer power of will, is my impression of him. So, comes into the Overwatch League and suddenly there's no more Lucio, or barely any. So what's an aggressive Lucio got to do? Well, apparently become one of the best Mercies in the league. So the transition this guy has made is pretty phenomenal to me. Neptuno is now a guy that dies really limited amounts unnecessarily in my mind. He's known as the fragging Mercy, so he definitely still has the most pistol kills. There you see where, you know, that aggressive Lucio and former DPS player comes through. But I think in general, his kind of play, and also I think he also does some of the shot calling in that team. I think he has been a great asset to the team. Once again, a guy that at least in the European scene, maybe had a bit of a chip on his shoulder, completely turned it around. Philadelphia Fusion didn't take that truism of, oh yeah, Tunu is a very aggressive to support at all to mind. Just knew that this guy was able to work hard, work through kidney stones, and then formed him into this great support player that he is now. Another talent that was obviously on the team is Snillo, and I think if I look at it and remember correctly, with hindsight now, he was probably a little bit underappreciated in the European scene, but if we were thinking about like great talented traces, I think most people had Davin in mistakes over Snillo at the time. Now, once again, never change the running system, right? Nope, not for the Philadelphia Fusion. In a high-pressure situation in the stage playoff finals, we suddenly see that EQO and Shadowburn were substituted out, and Snillo comes in, plays with Carpe, and it works marvelously. And it looked to be like the golden hand of the coaching staff that basically then won them this series. And it was a very ballsy move, but once again, this truism of, you know, players that haven't played on stage before are probably nervous. No, they know their player, they know what they're capable of, they know the robustness of the player's mental state, and if he would crumble in that situation, put him in, he delivers. Once again, typically Philadelphia Fusion. Now, in my mind, the absolute craziest progression, and it has to be the most improved player, I think, in the Overwatch League, is their star player, and probably, other than Carpe, who's pretty much the only truism that sort of hold true. Carpe is a nuts carry, and he still is, and that's the only thing that really, you know, conventionally still holds up for an Overwatch fan that was watching the competition pre-Overwatch League. That Carpe was great, but no, EQO not only replaced what we thought was one of the best Genjis in the world in this role, he also continuously added new heroes to his pool, was a very good performer on all of them. Junkrat comes to mind, no Hanzo, played respectable performances on off picks as well. And this was a guy that, unless you played a lot of European ladder, I think, you probably had never heard of him before the World Cup. So what happened was basically that he played on a full Israeli team, was not making it past, I think, quarterfinals in Go for Overwatch tournaments, really didn't have that big of a success, was then part of Team Israel. They didn't have much success either, and everyone was like, who's this EQO kid? Like, why are they picking that up, right? Like, someone that not only, it's not like a Jonak case where he's completely a blank slate. No, this was a guy that actually didn't have that great performances, at least on paper. If you just were looking at the raw results, he had been experiences in his pro career before. Once again, Philadelphia Fusion doesn't care. They're building from scratch. So what they did was they saw the potential in the guy. He became one of the most, I would say, prolific and unique Genjis we've seen in Overwatch. Not only was he able to play the way he did, but he also did it while shot calling. And that is obviously a crazy thing to ask players. And nowadays, that's very much required for a lot of Overwatch League teams, that your flex DPS is also a very vocal one. EQO embodies exactly that requirement. He definitely looks to be sort of the emotional leader of this team. Philadelphia Fusion looked extremely different when he was in and when he was out, I have to say. They looked like a completely transformed team. He gave them a sort of guidance, and obviously this is from the outside, not knowing any of the comms and how that happened. But if there is one epitomizing person in the Philadelphia Fusion, what they stand for, where they break with conventions, where they don't care about reputations, it has to be EQO, who now looks to be definitely a top 10 player in the Overwatch League. So I hope I could make the case that Philadelphia Fusion really didn't care that much what other people thought of them, of Overwatch, and of, I guess, their approach in general, and took a lot of chances which in the end paid out, and we maybe will see it pay out even more, even though I think that London Spitfire has a slight edge over them, but it's definitely not more than a 60-40 in my mind, and it's definitely very possible that this video was about the eventual winner of the first season of the inaugural Overwatch League. Thanks for watching.